So I'm going to kick it off by talking about digital transformation. And for us, this is an area that everyone needs to be thinking about. We've seen different waves of transformation as we've, if you're as old as I and Werner is. But what we really need to do is to focus on what's happening from a technological perspective and how that's driving change for our business. So to give you a bit of background, I work across a lot of the global business within the Nordics for Group M, and I also am a part of a group that's called Business Science that focuses on digital transformation, omni-channel, marketing technology, and business intelligence. My history is that I'm an American. I've been in Denmark for quite a long time, but it hasn't helped my Danish very much. The last 5.5 years I spent in New York running our global Dell business. Very big piece of business for us. Before that, I ran Nokia globally, and then I was in charge of Beyond Interactive, our digital agency, Mediacom's digital agency across Europe. To kick off the presentation today, I thought I'd start with a video. This guy does a pretty good job of teeing it up.
Once upon a time, business as usual was often good enough. No more. Where we are going, good enough is dead. In a world where everything is connected, where everything is equally excellent, where performance is reaching perfection, there's only one space left to innovate in: you. Right now, you are a central point in the raging tornado of change fueled by digitization, mobilization, augmentation, disintermediation, automation. Well, the list goes on. Science fiction is becoming science fact. Think about self-driving cars or computers that can learn and think. The way we work will never be the same. The skills we need will be dramatically different. Winning or losing are now happening faster than ever before. So what's your response? How will you discover new opportunities in one of the most transformational times in human history? Are you driving change, or are you being driven by it?
I cut it there, but you can go up and see the rest of it on YouTube. So basically what we're faced with is transformational change happening. We think about the impact of technology on business, on marketing, and media. And what we see is exponential change. I think one of the key things is when we take a step back and think, can we really manage this, is right now it's the best time ever to be a marketer. I think it was boring back in the days when we were just doing TV. Now it's pretty exciting. So keeping up is the challenge that we have. When we talk about digital transformation, basically what we're talking about is digital technologies that are coming on board and changing consumer behavior. And what it is how are we going to respond as companies to the changes that are happening out there? So what I'm going to do through this presentation is kind of tee it up from a big picture perspective to talk about the changes that we see, and then talk about what you can do about it. And I get pretty prescriptive as we get through the presentation. We see kind of 4 key things driving this need for digital transformation. The first is technological change that's happening out there and the speed of that. The next is the Internet of Things, or all these billions of connected devices that are becoming online. And what both of these first 2 elements are doing is driving change from a media behavior perspective. We all know it. You all have your mobile phones. I can see them out there now. We dig into our pockets probably 20 times a day and check everything we need to do all our lives. So on the back of these first 3 things, what we see is big data. Now, big data is a pretty overused term, but what we talk about now when we think about the Internet of Things, it's gigantic data, exponential data. So imagining that is going to be key for us. We do something called Group M Next, which is focused on the future. It's a seminar we do for all our clients. So if you haven't been to that, please come next year. One of the things we do is we invite a company called Singularity University. That's a kind of a think tank from California that thinks big thoughts. And what they did for us was kind of tee up the idea of how much change is happening over a period of time. So if you look here, you can see they've defined from 1900 to 1970, that much technological change happened. That same amount of technological change happened in 5 years from 2010 to 2015. So you can see what we're facing is this idea of exponential change happening, and that'll get shorter and shorter and shorter. So we'll be seeing the same amount of technological change that happened over 70 years happening in 1 year. And that's a lot to keep up with. So what's happening on the back end of that? It's changing consumer behavior. So what brands are doing now is they're expecting what consumers are doing now is expecting brands to be a part of their digital lifestyle. They have really high expectations across a lot of different areas. If we outline kind of 4 key areas here, we can see the first thing that is that all of us are hyper-connected. And what that means is that we expect immediate response on the back end of that. The second thing is that we're data aware, and that is that so consumers now are expecting brands to be a part of their lives and to use that data to craft better experiences for them. The next thing is customers are well informed. So, and they're social at heart. So they basically are driven by this idea of having brands as a part of that social experience. And that is key in taking an understanding about what we need to do to drive from a social perspective. And the last thing is that we're distracted. And that is that customers expect this kind of concise content and experience from the advertisers and brands that they interact with. So what we're seeing is another set of benchmarks that are out there. Customers want the simplicity of Apple, the omnipresence of Google, the content of YouTube, the intelligence of Amazon, the immediacy of Twitter, the experience of Uber, and the relevance of Facebook. And they want this in real time, customized for themselves. And they want this across all the touch points that we're working with. So what happens in the back end of that? It gives us data. And data is one of the key areas that we're going to talk a lot about today, technology and data. If you think about it, data is kind of the next frontier. We've been talking about it for a long period of time, but really what the opportunity is for us is to use that data to drive competitive advantage and to use it to make our marketing better. McKinsey did a study that said companies that put data at the center of their sales and marketing can drive a 25% increase in their ROI, or a 15 to 20% increase in their ROI. So what we do is consulting. And when we come on board with our clients, what we try and do from a technology perspective is have an understanding about what we can do to help drive change within their business. We talk about it in waves. And the first wave is trying to kind of reduce and eliminate inefficiency. So that is the data sets that you have, or if you're working from a siloed approach. The next thing that we'll talk about is marketing technology and bringing marketing technology on board. And Balthazar will come back and talk about that later on in the presentation. But new technology allows us then to drive data-driven insights, to think differently about our customers, to have a full understanding of the customer journey and the different touch points we have, and have data around that to back that up. On the dark side of data, we have, I'll call this the dark side, we have the giant media giants that are out there: Facebook, Amazon, Google, MSN, eBay, or Blue Visa is called here, Twitter. All these guys are collecting an incredible amount of data about our behavior. But the challenge with that is that they're not willing to share that behavior with us, and they're not willing to share that cross-platform. So one of the key things that we think that clients and customers need to do right now is to manage that data in their own right. Don't get in the pockets of Google. Don't go in and start uploading your email database into Facebook necessarily, unless you think it's a good thing. So one of the things is just thinking about data in that perspective. One of the other challenges that brands face right now is that consumer behavior is changing faster than they can keep up with. And this requires some changes from us from a marketing perspective. And what digital transformation can do is help us understand the need for speed, create a sense of urgency. And what that needs to be reflected in is our marketing. So we need to be more adaptive and more agile. And this is a quote from Darwin that says, "It's not the strongest that will survive, nor is the most intelligent, but the most adaptive to change." So we talk about change. One of the things we need to think about is innovation and how quickly that happens. This is something from Accenture. And I think we're all familiar with this old curve of innovation. We talk about innovators to laggards, and we have a leisurely 10 to 15 years from the introduction to the product to when it's out there and everybody's using it. Nowadays, what we talk about is the shark fin approach, and that is new disruptive technologies come on board, and in a period of 3 to 5 years, they change everything. They disrupt businesses, and companies leave. You can just think about Nokia, for example, one of the customers that I work with. Gone, totally. Kodak, gone, totally. So we have disruptive technologies that change that, and what that means for us as marketers, we need to think faster. We need to innovate. We need to continuously try and drive change and think about new ways of doing things. So for us, digital transformation is basically trying to understand what the impact of these technological changes are on our clients and how we're going to respond to that. And the key thing for this is really understanding our customers. Now, we all talk about it. We all say customer experience and customer journey mapping. But what we're talking about in a digital transformation journey is really understanding that and mapping that. And we'll get into that as we move forward. So customer experience and digital transformation, they go hand in hand in our book. You have the whole idea of your customer experience, but we have the technology that's coming on board. And the sweet spot and the area that we need to focus on is where we create value for businesses. And when you think about digital transformation, it means a lot of things to a lot of people. But for us, what we try to do is create a simple process about how we work with clients to drive change in this direction. And what that helps you do is it creates kind of a roadmap of how you need to think and how you need to work on areas that are quite complex at times. So the map looks like this, a lot of stuff on here, but there's kind of 3 key buckets that we like to focus on when we start a digital transformation journey with the customer. The first is this idea of vision and leadership. The second is then what kind of team and who's going to be doing that. The third is the customer experience part of that. And I'll go into these in detail here as we move forward. When we think about the role of marketing, we often see them, from our perspective, as change agents within an organization. And why do we do that? Is because marketing feels the pressure that comes from clients, and they also then can react internally. So marketing teams are often the ones that evolve as the change agent in a digital transformation journey. And this is where marketers can take the high ground and try and drive that change within an organization. So once you've kind of established who's going to be that change agent, the next thing that you need to do is to create a vision. And a vision about digital transformation is where are we? Where do we want to go? What's best in class out there? What are our competitors doing? And how do we need to get there? So it's a relatively simple exercise that you need to do, and we can also help you with that. One of the key things that comes out of this is this idea of building a business case and then getting executive support. So the change team needs to work together with the executive team to kind of create a dialogue around why digital transformation is important. And we've done this for a lot of our clients. And I think working with senior level marketers and senior level business directors and CEOs, once you get the point in front of them, they begin to understand why they need to have a sense of urgency around digital transformation. The next thing you need to do is to build a team around driving transformation. And often when we get on the ground within companies, what we see are centers of excellence or pockets of people that are doing great work, but they're not aligned and they're working in silos. So one of the things that we think you need to do is to start thinking about a center of excellence, aligning these teams and getting them together to start working together around digital transformation. Bring them on board with what we're trying to do, sell them into the concept and say, you're going to help us facilitate this transformation within the organization. Oftentimes what we see then is some challenges that arise, and that has to do with a siloed approach. Many of us have built companies based on performance around a multi-channel way of looking at the world. And that means we optimize search, we optimize social, we optimize display and CRM and all those things. But those companies don't necessarily work well together. So organizational change can help you have a dialogue around how we need to do to facilitate this, and it also empowers these resources to try and help drive change. And the last thing we think is really key is IT. IT has a heritage of being the owners of web or data or technology. And oftentimes you need to ensure that they're on board when you start driving a digital transformation journey. This next slide is probably the most important, and it's around customer experience. So, oftentimes us as a media agency, we think about media, and this is what we do. But for customers, what you need to really start doing is thinking about the holistic way. And this is also the way that we're transforming our business internally. We don't just see ourselves as media any longer. We need to see ourselves as the interlinking parts of a lot of connected wholes. And so if we look at customer experience, we see kind of 5 key buckets that you need to focus on. The first is creating a customer journey or a customer experience map. And this is the key part that allows you then to go in and say, what do we need to do? How do we need to do it? When are we going to need to do it? And I'll talk to you a little bit about that later when we go a little bit deeper into the customer journey. The next thing I think is key is this idea of a digital first mindset. And that means not necessarily that you have to spend more money on digital, but what you need to do is look at digital as the connective tissue across the different touch points that we have, and see that as the binding element across all the journey that we have with consumers. The next thing we see is, the next thing we think is important is this idea of a culture of innovation. And innovation, oftentimes what we face is the companies don't have the resource or the time to change the business while they're running the business. The focus is on driving results short term and not necessarily on changing the business. But by creating a culture of innovation, what you do is you focus a team on changing the business. You allocate resource and time to drive change within that organization. And I'll talk to you a little bit later on about how we did that for a client that I worked on. The next thing that you do when you think about the customer journey and the customer experience map is think about data integration. There's a lot of great data out there. Oftentimes what we see when we work with companies, it's in pockets. So you have information about your display and your search and your CRM programs, but they're not interlinked and they're not working together. So data integration is one of the key things in driving a customer experience focused. And the last is internal collaboration, and we all know it. A lot of times we're focused on our silo, we're focused on the approach that we need to have within an organization to drive what our goals are. But internal collaboration is one of the key areas that can really help when you're driving a digital transformation journey. So when we talk about customer experience, this is kind of an eye chart, but what I thought is, when I said what you need to do, now I thought I would show you why it's important. These are some charts from McKinsey and from Bain, and basically what it says is 1% of customers feel that their customer experience expectations are met. 86% are willing to pay up to 25% more for a better customer experience. One negative experience takes 12 good experiences to make up for it. Another thing down here, it costs up to 7 times more to acquire new customers than to retain the current customers that we have. So customer experience should be a focus for all of us. So when we get on the ground and we think about customer experience, we think about digital transformation, what we try to do is assess where clients are from a digital transformation perspective, or from a digital perspective. And basically there's kind of 5 key buckets here. The first is heroic efforts, and basically we call that just a good word for a starting point, right? So you're trying to do your best with the resources that you have. The next level is this idea of you're optimizing, but you're doing it from a multi-channel approach within a silo. So you're doing good work digitally, but it's only focused on the silos that you're optimized against. The next thing that you need to do is you need to take a step back and start looking at this customer journey and this customer experience. And so that's a customer-shaped focus, or a customer-shaped way of looking at the world. And so once you've done that, then out of the back end of that comes this idea about how do we then need to service the clients against their experience, and that is an experience-driven approach. And the last, kind of the black belt of this digital transformation, digital expertise chart is focused on doing number 4, at scale, at speed. So basically serving clients an experience on the back end of it and doing it in real time with real data. So what we're talking about is trying to move away from the siloed approach, where we have our email, our display, our events, our social, all done in isolation, to a more systems-based approach, where we look at content as the aligning factor across the different touch points that the customers are experiencing with. So it's one of the key areas that we need to think about. And what is key for doing this? It's creating a customer experience map. Now, I don't know how many of you guys have these. There's a lot of work going on right now, and there's a lot of ways of looking at it. But we have an approach to try and drive a customer experience map. There's kind of 4 key steps from that. The first is basically getting an understanding of where your customers are, studying their behavior, studying the touch points that you have, studying the interactions you have with your customers. The next phase is then kind of trying to understand what model we need to use. And there are a lot of customer journeys out there that you can work with. There's McKinsey model, which is kind of the flight of the bumblebee in a circular fashion. There's also linear approaches that I think are a little easier to work with sometimes for clients. The next thing is that what you need to do is to work to create this map. So sitting down either in multifunctional teams with a facilitator to help you diagram the different touch points you have and the interactions you have across that. And I'll show you an idea of that in a second. And the last thing is then using the map to look at new ideas, using the map to look at low-hanging fruit or breakage across the journeys that you may have. Well, this is a bit of an eye chart, but basically what it is, it's a customer journey. And there are a lot of ways of looking at this, and there's a lot of approaches you can use to drive that. But a journey starts out with kind of understanding the different stages, and this uses passive stage to support. So it goes through all the different phases there. The next thing you need to do is to map out the different touch points that you have. So what are the customers doing? How are we touching those customers? How are we interacting? What are the things that are triggering them to make decisions in this way? The third bucket talks about what are customers thinking, and this is a more qualitative approach. We need to understand across these different phases what do customers have in their mind, what do they think is working, what do they think is not working, what's turning them on and what's turning them off. So that's one of the key things that you need to think about. The next is an evaluation of these different things. And so if you think about it from a passive stage perspective, you can think about are customers aware of us? Are they familiar with our brand? Are we in the consideration set? And across that, you can just map this out. And this is something that Group M and Mindshare can bring to the table because we have data that can help map each one of these different areas. The next thing is a more qualitative approach, and that is how good are we at omni-channel experience? How good are we at omni-channel content? How is our content aligned across the different touch points we have? And there it's kind of a more qualitative evaluation if we're doing a good job or not. And the last thing, and one of the key things, is this idea of data integration. So we're generating an incredible amount of data across this consumer journey. So is that data aligned? Are we using it optimally? Are there any data that we're missing that we could do better? How can we take the data from the customer support perspective and feed that back into our trigger or our active stages? These are all things that can be done from a customer journey perspective, and more, actually. So what I thought I'd do is take you through a case. And in the audience, we have two people from ad people that worked with me on Dell globally. So that was quite interesting to find out that those guys were going to be here. But what I thought I'd do is talk to you about the journey that we drove Dell through. Now, I think you guys all know Dell Computers. It's a big piece of business, $450 million for MediaCom at that point in time. They have 5 regions, 43 markets, and 4 business units. So it was quite complex structure. In 2012, 2013, they were having some serious challenges, losing market share. Lenovo was coming on board. HP was pushing them down, breathing down their neck. Apple was coming on board, and many of you millennials will know that your preferred computer is a Macintosh, right? So what we said to them was, the other thing I think that was key for them at that point in time is they were really siloed. They tried to optimize their business within search, within display, within CRM, and the budgets did not flow across that. So each team was fighting basically internally for resource to try and drive that part of the business. So what we said was, guys, you need to think a little bit differently about this. You need to break down those silos. You need to start thinking a little bit more omni-channel. So this is the journey that we took them through, and I'll talk you through that. The first thing we did was map out their customer experience, their customer journey. That was a little bit of an older version of the model that I showed you earlier. But basically what we said to them was, you need to think about the touch points that you have and our budget allocation across those different touch points. And as Emra and Martin will remember, at that point in time, they were doing a lot of freestanding inserts or catalogs in newspapers in the major metropolitan hubs. So we said to you guys, is that a good idea or not? When you map out your journey, what you can see is about 81% of the touch points that you have, but because Dell, you have to buy Dell computers online, that was the only way to get them, are digital. So what we need to do is start thinking in a different way and drive the business in a different direction. So we came up with a strategy which had 3 different touch points, so 3 different key strategic areas. The first was this idea of digital first, a little bit different than I talked about digital first earlier. This was more a budget focus. So we said we wanted to move from 35 to 40% of the budget in digital to 65 to 75% of the budget in digital. The next thing we said is we need to break down the barriers across the organization and start thinking a little bit more omni-channel. We need to think across not only the different silos within the way that we're optimize our media, but we also need to start thinking across the different brands within the organization. They had small and medium, perfect example, they had small and medium business that owned a bunch of keywords, and they wouldn't relinquish those keywords to consumer. And unfortunately for consumer, they were driving about 20% of the consumer business. So when small and media business cut off their search, that impacted the consumer business. And we were like, no brainer here, guys, start thinking in a different direction. The next thing I think that was really key and critical was getting technology and analytics on board. Balthazar, again, is going to talk to you a bit about that, but there was a lot of new technology coming out that Dell wasn't taking advantage of. We said we need to create a process around how we're going to start embedding this technology in the way that we do business. The next thing that we thought was key was, and I talked a bit about this earlier, and that is the run the business versus change the business approach. Dell had no resource to focus on change the business. So what we said to him was that you guys need to take some resources, take some time, take some people, and focus them on driving innovation. So we came up with a model that said every year we're going to sit down with you guys and put an innovation plot in place. And then we're going to talk about prioritization of these different innovation ideas and then testing them out as we move through our campaign flow. So basically we came up with this, and that is test, which is about 10 to 20% of the budget, and they allocated this consequently from that point on every year. And they didn't evaluate the test things as they evaluated the rest of the business. So what we said was 10 to 20% of our budget is going to be focused on innovation. Then as those innovation plots, if they succeed, we move them into a growth phase, and then they become a part of the core business. And this is kind of cyclical, because what happens is new ideas that come on board, they're pushed up, and as they succeed, they move into the core business, and then we bring new ideas in from the bottom. So when I think a lot of change happened at Dell at that point in time. Michael Dell took Dell private. They came out with a lot of great products. They got their mojo back. I think our help in this digital transformation perspective also helped drive change within the organization. So when I take a step back and I think, what is it that happened? What is it that succeeded here? The first thing was a vision that they put in place around what they needed to do from a technology and digital transformation perspective. The next thing was this idea of focus on continuous innovation, trying to change, being open for change, and not resisting. The third thing was an internal champion. Monique Bonner was her name. She really got a name for herself through this whole idea of driving digital transformation, and she helped us take that story all the way up to Michael Dell, who bought into it, and then pushed that back through the organization. And they made some serious organizational change in the back of the things that they needed to do there. And the last thing is this idea of ongoing education and training, because oftentimes when you think about the digital transformation journey that you're taking customers through, you need to start training people that may not be digital natives to do this, because we can't always depend on millennials as much as we'd like to. Just too few of them. So when I think about customer-centric digital transformation, it's really difficult when you think about it without having a roadmap or an approach to do this. So what we've tried to do is to outline an approach that you can take from a customer perspective to drive a digital transformation journey. The first thing we do when we sit down with you would be to think about a digital gap analysis. Where are you at? What are you doing? What are your skill sets? What are you focused on? What are you doing good? What are you not doing good? These can be across the areas like agility, or content, or alignment of creative, even simple things in that way. The next is then creating this vision. So what do we need to do? Where are we at? Where do we want to go? And how do we need to get there? Benchmarking against best in class that are out there. And that could be a benchmark against an Amazon or an eBay that we see oftentimes are good at driving transformational journeys. The next thing is then you take that journey and you build the business case, and you take that to executive management and say, we need to change. We need to do things differently. And here's the approach, here's the vision, and here's what we need to do. So that business case can help or make or break a digital transformation journey. The next thing we talked a bit about was this omni-channel customer experience focus. And that starts with this customer experience map. Sitting down, working together, cross-functional, mapping out the journey that we have and the experiences that the customer has throughout the touch points that you have out there. And then saying, what are the low-hanging fruits, short-term, medium-term, long-term, and the opportunities that we have. The next is a marketing technology assessment. Marketing technology for us is key in this data-driven world. And so oftentimes what we can do is come in and say, what do you have? What do you need? What do we need to do to drive the business case? And this can be across a lot of the areas that Vasa-Akers talking about. DMPs, DCO, DSPs, attribution, all that type of all those words that we love to use. Data management platforms for, I'm sure Vasa-Akers will explain shortly. The next thing is this digital first approach. And basically what that is a strategy. It's a strategy based on the vision we have about how we want to take digital transformation to the business and what are we going to do in the short term. It could be something similar to what we did on Dell or something totally different. And the last thing is this idea of an innovation strategy. So driving innovation, assuring that you have the resources that can focus on changing the business, not just running the business optimally. So, a kind of summary, if you take a big step back and think, marketing could own the high ground from a digital transformation perspective. And if we think of a couple different studies that are out there, this is from a company called Altimeter. They say CMOs are 54% of the time, the ones that are driving digital transformation journeys within an organization. The next big bucket is CEOs, which of course you'd expect. And then another one from Accenture that says by 2020, the CMO will spend more on IT than the CIO. So that gets back to this whole idea of marketing technology. So what can you do as a marketer if you want to drive a digital transformation journey? You can become a visible change agent within your organization. You can create a vision around that. You can embrace this idea of an omni-channel approach. Think about it beyond just what your remit might be. Think about the customer experience from start to end and all the different touch points you have there. So they own a broader perspective than necessarily you might have. The next thing is to train your teams, to lead and transform them from a digital perspective. And that is, the first easy bucket is just eliminating the silos across the organization. Oftentimes we see customers coming in and eliminating the CMO role and basically putting a CXO role in place. So I don't know if that's a customer experience officer. And that's a part of the journey that you need to have to think about, what are we putting first, marketing or experience? Then the other thing is starting to work with data in real time. So thinking about the technology that you need to bring to bear, and also the way that you're going to use that technology to drive change. And the last thing is kind of reorienting your marketing organization around innovation. So when I think about digital transformation, it's going to be a journey that we're going to be on forever, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how old you are. If you think about what happens, technology is going to continue to evolve. All these devices are going to change the way that we need to think. But what it is you need to start at some point. And I think this is the good quote: a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. So reach out to us, talk to us about what we can help you with from a digital transformation perspective.